I think this is the point of Bernard Lown's story. Somebody must take the initiative.
This was a man who saw around the corners and could see into the future.
He said, I know this is hard, but think of what we win when we win.
He's done so many things in his life, any one of which sort of would make someone's career. Learning why digitalis would give some people fatal heart arrhythmias, the defibrillator, and he just moved on to the next thing.
You know, many of us recognize when we've spent time with him that he's bar none the finest clinician we've ever encountered.
Dr. Lown rounded 3 days a week, and I looked forward to those days. That is where I learned my approach to patients.
When you go into the room with that patient was the only person in the world for Dr. Lown.
And the first thing he would do is sit down, pull up a chair, and sit face to face with the patient. And they're in the bed feeling very vulnerable, and you could just see how everything just would unfold.
Within a very brief period of time, I was totally at ease with Bernie.
He provided an example of the kind of care that we all wanted our parents to have.
My father suddenly stopped being an illness in a human body. My father was a human being. Dr. Lown was taking care of him, and he knew what that meant.
It was an extraordinary privilege to be his associate. When I rotated through the coronary care unit, Dr. Lown was the attending. I enjoyed the challenge, always learned something. I wished he'd let me ask 2 questions a day instead of 1, but I always learned something anyway.
Marshall was so smart and he had so many questions that Bernard finally had to limit him to 1 question a day.
He used to drive me crazy because every time I'd meet him, he says, I have 10 questions. And that would have taken most of my day.
I guess some complex questions, so I get 2 answers out of 1 question.
At any time during rounds, we would change from something to do with the patient's heart to his turning towards one of the interns or residents and said, what's the last book you read?
My initial thought was, what textbook? Which cardiology textbook? He said, no, what novel? He said, you can't be a physician unless you're reading a novel.
Bernard used that as a point that you can't take care of patients unless you're part of the fabric of your patient's life.
Every day I was scrambling for childcare, and every day I was getting later and later for rounds. Finally on Friday I was so late that I came dashing through the swinging doors of the Lown cardiac unit just as Dr. Lown was leaving, having finished rounds, with his whole entourage. And he stopped and he glared at me and he said, Dr. Roberts, if you were a man, you'd have been fired by now. And I just lost my Irish temper and I said, Dr. Lown, if I were a man, I'd have a wife looking after my children. And there was this collective gasp. And after what seemed like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds, Dr. Lown said, that's a very good retort. And I almost fainted with relief. And we have been friends ever since.
Dr. Lown came up with the idea of using DC voltage, which I had an understanding of course, being in the TV business, and he said they would like to use me basically as a guinea pig. He said they just did not know enough about it, and he said, yeah, we're just dumb. There's a lot of stuff we don't know, and I've never heard a doctor tell me before that he was dumb. Apparently, as I said, they maybe didn't give me enough anesthesia, so that when they gave me the paddles, and boom, it felt like a horse kicked me in the chest or something. It wasn't painful, it was just like a wallop, like getting hit or banged or punched. It was just momentary. Hey, what can I say? It kept me alive.
The impact of Dr. Lown, I think is so powerful because the messages are so simple and true, and they resonate with people. The individual human being is of infinite value, and if you can help him, you do anything you can. And if you need to advance and stretch the field of science, you need to do that. And then is that enough? No, it's not enough. You need to take responsibility for the larger world.
And I think this is the point of Bernard Lown's story. Somebody must take the initiative. And if you take the initiative, then there's a good chance that other people will follow. And that's how movements grow, and that's how change takes place.
A fundamental aspect of IPPNW is a recognition that politicians need to be compelled by people whose life is in jeopardy.
Dr. Lown always talked about how nuclear weapons and humanity cannot coexist. It's one or the other.
This was the greatest political issue of our time because it didn't mean the death of an individual, but the death of multitudes. So why would doctors not get involved? Here's where it began.
We kept meeting in Bernie Lown's living room, and it was an exhilarating time because we were kind of making it up on the fly. There was no script. By 1985, we were awarded the Nobel Prize for Peace. As is often the case with the Nobel Prize, they're not really rewarding you for what you've already done. They're sending a message. This is something that the Nobel Committee thinks is very important.
And we have to find new ways to reach out. And the Nobel is laying down a gauntlet for us, that we physicians have to do more.
Dr. Lown, I think, had a mix of emotions at that time. It was, first of all, emotionally charged because his friend, Dr. Chazov, was being criticized in the press. And it was emotionally charged because we almost had a person die right in front of us.
Repeat my question. Do you regret or deplore that you signed the appeal against Sakharov in 1973?
Пресс-конференция движения.
This is not a personal conference of mine, but a press conference of the movement.
In the midst of all of this, in the front row, suddenly this guy keels over and looks like sudden cardiac death. We were doing the resuscitation and he began to come around a little bit, but he really looked like he was dying. It was important to not let it end on that note. We had to complete what we were there for.
You know, when the crisis comes, Soviet and American cardiologists cooperate. And this crisis we face now in a big way for all humankind. And this is a very strange parable that shows we forget our ideology, we forget our differences. We do not care whether it's a Russian or American.
You know, it shows you how deeply caring, I think, Lown really was, that this affected him on all of those levels. Lo and behold, the guy made it. He lived. As a matter of fact, he recovered, and then some of our doctors went to visit him in the hospital after he recovered from this heart attack. And for years after that, Lev Novikov would give talks about how great IPPNW was. I don't know if he agreed with our politics, but he certainly agreed with our resuscitation attempts.
He's a man of the world who has dedicated his life to service his patients and to the happiness of entire mankind.
One of the impressive things about Dr. Lown is that he's committed not just to patients in front of him, but to people all around the world, wherever they may be.
Satellite started back before there was the World Wide Web. Satellite started before a lot of us here in the United States knew anything about internet or interconnectivity. We were the first email providers in Africa. This is where Dr. Lown was really out on the cutting edge. Put up a satellite, set up some ground stations in Africa, and expect people to start communicating with each other. And his whole premise was we can use satellites for peace. We don't have to have Star Wars. We can make the world a better place using the same technology. And in fact, he proved that it was true.
This is a model that offers hope for the larger part of the world where the resources are scarce, but the problems are just as significant.
As much as Dr. Lown is a pioneer, his vision for satellite life is that it should be pioneering. You know, I'm comfortable in saying we're true to his vision and we're doing the work that he really started this organization to do.
I don't think it's possible to see into the future. It's only possible to hope for the future, and it's possible to act for the future in the hopes that then you will see something.
Really, action has always been a hallmark of everything that Bernard does.
It seemed like particularly small people, individuals, academics could really do nothing. And yet he said something can be done.
You think you've reached your limit in terms of what's possible to do, and he somehow helps reach into other people and just brings out even more energy.
He's just like a force of nature.
Nobody in a position like Bernie's can succeed without a very close person. You need somebody who's really your best friend.
Louise Lown is a force in and of herself.
Without Louise Lown, we wouldn't have a Bernard Lown.
Well, she's really his secret weapon, and I give her a lot of the credit.
I think that Dr. and Mrs. Lown are one of the great untold love stories. And she is a human rights activist in her own right. They just seem to complement each other perfectly.
It's a package. They come together.
You know, in the Catholic faith, we have saints, you know, and I'd say Louise Lown is a saint.
She's a saint because she puts up with Bernie.
In 1978, outside this front door, Louise and I were standing on the grounds. It was a late spring afternoon, and I was standing there, and suddenly, out of a clear blue, I say, I have an answer. Soviet doctors and American doctors have to create a compact. She says, I didn't think she says, are you smoking pot? But something to that effect. The night before, Gorbachev asked me to address the forum. It was totally unprepared, I thought. So at 12 midnight, Louise and I sat down, and I was dictating to her, and I was tired and irritable, and she was patient as a saint. The more irritable I got, the more tranquil she became.
It is he who got the Nobel Prize, and it is he who was on TV, and it is he who writes the papers. But it is so apparent that it would have been very hard to be Bernard if somebody wasn't there being Louise with him.
If you can get sort of a critical mass of interested, energetic, hardworking physicians who really believe in the absolute necessity of doing something about the cause, then you can have success.
Even if Dr. Lown is not leading the charge, that those of us who've been influenced by his example will do our part to carry on the mission.
And I think it's a critical time that his vision and his approach be preserved.
We have an endless role as long as we understand our mission.
The best way to pay tribute to Dr. Lown is to join him.
That's how you pay tribute to them, by sending a message that we heard you loud and clear, and we're going to keep that mission alive indefinitely.